It wasn't just a steak knife. For billionaire Alistair Finch, the improperly placed utensil was a symbol of a world unraveling a tiny crack in the perfect facade he'd built around his grief. He was a man who could buy cities, but couldn't buy back a single yesterday. And tonight, in the heart of Manhattan's most exclusive French restaurant, all that cold, compressed rage was about to detonate. The target a quiet waitress named Clara. He thought she was nobody. He thought he could break her. He never imagined that her response in 3 perfect words of French would shatter his world far more than his yelling ever could. Alistair Finch moved through the world cushioned by silence, the whisper-quiet electric engine of his Rolls-Royce Phantom, the sound-dampened walls of his 80th floor office overlooking Central Park, the deferential hush that fell over any room he entered. These were the textures of his life. Silence was control. It was power, but tonight the silence was a roaring void, a hollowed-out space that was once filled with laughter, with the gentle cadence of a Parisian accent, with the life of his wife, Juliet. It was October 11th, the 2nd anniversary, a date seared into his soul like a cattle brand. He'd told his executive assistant, a ruthlessly efficient woman named Ms. Albright, to clear his schedule. No calls, no meetings, no decisions. He was to be left utterly alone. But solitude was a mirror, and he loathed the reflection he saw. His destination was a small, brutally authentic French bistro in the West Village called Le Ciel Bleu. It was Juliet's favorite. Not for the Michelin stars it didn't have, but for its soul. The owner, a grumpy traditionalist named Jean-Pierre, cooked the food of his grandmother from Lyon. It was the only place in New York where the coq au vin tasted, as Juliet used to say, like a memory. As the rolls pulled up, the city lights blurred through the rain-streaked windows. Alistair didn't wait for his driver, a stoic man named Thomas, to open the door. He pushed it open himself, stepping into the damp chill, the collar of his custom Tom Ford coat turned up against the wind. He was a man in his late 50s with a shock of silver hair and eyes the color of a winter sky. He hadn't become the titan of Finch Technologies by being soft. He was a predator in the world of code and capital, and he had forgotten how to be anything else. Inside Le Ciel Bleu was a warm pocket of light and noise, the clinking of cutlery, the murmur of conversations, the rich aroma of butter and wine. It was everything he hated tonight. It was life going on without her. The hostess, a young woman with wide, nervous eyes, recognized him immediately. "Mr. Finch, welcome. Your table is ready." He didn't acknowledge her. He just walked past his gaze, sweeping the room until it landed on their table. The small one in the corner by the window, half hidden by a lush fiddle-leaf fig. It was empty, a white tablecloth gleaming under a low-hanging lamp. It looked like a tombstone. He sat down the leather of the banquette, sighing under his weight. A young woman approached. She was tall and slender, with auburn hair pulled back in a simple, elegant knot. Her uniform, a crisp white shirt, and black apron, was immaculate. But there was a weariness in her eyes that Alistair, a man who prided himself on reading, people noticed instantly. He classified it as weakness. "Good evening, sir. My name is Clara. May I get you something to drink while you wait for your party?" Her voice was low and steady. "I'm not waiting for anyone." He snapped his voice, cutting through the restaurant's gentle hum. "A bottle of the 96 Chateau Margaux. And don't let the sommelier waste my time. Just bring it." Clara's expression didn't flicker. "An excellent choice, sir. Right away." She moved away with an economy of motion that spoke of experience. Alistair watched her go, a knot of irritation tightening in his chest. Everything about her seemed plain, unremarkable. She was a cog in a machine, a functionary. In his world, people like her were invisible. Tonight, he needed someone to see his pain, and the universe had sent him a ghost. Clara returned moments later with the wine. She presented the bottle, her hand steady. Chateau Margaux, 1996. He just grunted. She proceeded with the ritual, slicing the foil, cleanly easing the cork out with a barely audible sigh. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the gurgle of the wine pouring into the decanter. It was the wrong kind of silence. It wasn't the silence of respect. It was the silence of a subordinate waiting for an order. It grated on him. "Just leave it," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Of course, sir. Are you ready to order, or would you like a few minutes?" He stared at the menu without seeing it. The words were a blur. Escargots de Bourgogne, soufflé au fromage. Every item was a memory. Every dish was a ghost at the table. He remembered Juliet's delight as she tasted the soufflé for the first time, her eyes closing in bliss. He remembered her laughing, a drop of garlic butter on her chin as they shared the escargots. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his chest, and it needed somewhere to go. "I'll have the steak frites," he said, his voice hard. "Rare, saignant, if your chef knows what that means. And if it comes out even a hint of medium rare, I will send it back. I will send it back until he learns to cook." Clara met his gaze. There was no fear in her eyes, just a quiet assessment. It was this more than anything that infuriated him. She wasn't cowering. She wasn't falling all over herself to please the great Alistair Finch. "The chef Jean-Pierre is from Léon," she said calmly. "I assure you, he is intimately familiar with the concept of saignant." She turned and walked away, her back straight, leaving Alistair alone at the table for two with a decanter of wine that cost more than her month's rent, and a rage that was simmering, searching for a reason to boil over. The knife was already on the table. It just hadn't been misplaced yet. The appetizer came and went. A simple frisée salad with lardons. It was perfect. Annoyingly so. It gave him no ammunition. He drank the wine too quickly, pouring it himself, the deep, complex flavors doing nothing to soothe the jagged edges of his mood. He felt the eyes of other diners on him, a mixture of awe and fear. He was a known quantity in this city, a king in his own kingdom, and the king was not happy. Clara moved around her section with a serene grace, attending to a table of laughing tourists, and an elderly couple celebrating an anniversary. She was efficient, precise, almost invisible. But to Alistair, her quiet competence was a personal affront. It was as if her calm was mocking his chaos. Then the main course arrived. She placed the plate in front of him. A perfectly seared steak, its center, a deep, bloody red, lay next to a golden pile of impossibly crisp fries. The aroma of beef and thyme filled the air, but Alistair's eyes weren't on the food. They were fixed on the cutlery, the steak knife. It was placed on the left side of the fork. It was a minuscule error, a trivial slip-up in the grand dance of fine dining. Something a normal person wouldn't even notice. But for Alistair on this night in this place, it was a cataclysm. Juliet had been a stickler for etiquette. She believed the small details were the foundation of civilization. "How you place the knife, mon amour," she used to tease, "is how you approach your life. With intention. With order." This was not order. This was a slovenly, careless mistake. An insult to the memory of the woman who had taught him to appreciate these things. He stared at the knife. The silence in his head, the roaring void, suddenly stopped. It was replaced by a single sharp, resonant frequency of pure fury. He picked up the knife. Not by the handle. He pinched the blade between his thumb and forefinger and held it up. "What? he said, his voice dangerously low. "Is this—" Clara, who had been turning to leave, paused. She looked at the knife, then at his face. "I'm sorry, sir. Is there a problem with the knife?" "A problem with the knife," Alistair repeated, his voice rising, drawing the attention of the nearby tables. "No. The knife is fine. The problem is with its placement. The problem is with the utter lack of care, the complete absence of professionalism in this establishment. You put the knife on the wrong side." He tossed it onto the table. It clattered against a water glass with a sharp ching that made several people jump. I apologize, sir," Clara said, her composure finally showing a crack. A faint flush rose on her cheeks. "It was a mistake. I'll correct it immediately." A mistake. Alistair leaned forward, his voice now a venomous snarl. "You think this is about a mistake? This restaurant is meant to be a bastion of French culture, a place of refinement. And I am paying a small fortune to be here. I'm not paying for mistakes. I'm not paying for sloppiness. I'm paying for perfection, the kind of perfection people like you clearly know nothing about." The manager, Mr. Dubois, a perpetually flustered man with a pencil moustache, began scurrying over. "Mr. Finch, is everything all right?" he asked, wringing his hands. Alistair ignored him completely, his eyes locked on Clara. "Tell me," he said, the words dripping with condescension. "Do you even know what you're serving? Can you tell me about the terroir of the wine I'm drinking? Can you explain the Maillard reaction that seared this steak? Or are you just a pretty face hired to carry plates and make mistakes?" Clara stood, frozen, her face pale. She was trapped in the spotlight of his rage. The entire restaurant was silent now, watching the public execution. She opened her mouth to speak, but he cut her off. "No, don't answer. It's pointless. You're a child playing dress-up in a job you're not qualified for. This place used to have standards. It used to mean something." He gestured around the room with a dismissive wave. "Now it's just another tourist trap staffed by incompetents." He felt a cruel satisfaction as he saw her press her lips together, fighting to maintain her composure. He wanted to break her. He wanted her to cry. He wanted her to feel a fraction of the howling emptiness that he felt. He decided to deliver the killing blow. He switched to French, the language he had learned for Juliet, the language that was both a treasure and a source of constant pain. He spoke it well, but with the clear, sharp accent of a foreigner who had memorized the rules, but not the music. "L'incompétence est une langue universelle, je suppose," he said with a smirk. "Incompetence is a universal language, I suppose?" He leaned back, expecting a flustered, confused silence. He expected the manager to grovel and offer to fire her on the spot. He expected to have won. He was wrong. The silence that followed his French remark was different. It was heavy-charged. Alistair watched Clara's face, waiting for the crumble. It didn't come. Instead, something shifted in her eyes. The defensiveness, the shame, it all vanished, replaced by a sudden, cool fire. She took a small, deliberate breath. When she spoke, the voice that emerged was not the one he had heard before. The simple, low American tone was gone. In its place was the pure, melodic, and effortlessly sophisticated French of the 16th arrondissement of Paris. It was the French of academia, of old money, of a lifetime spent immersed in the language's deepest rhythms. It was Juliet's French. "Au contraire, monsieur." She began, her voice perfectly level, yet carrying a resonance that silenced every other sound in the room. "On the contrary, sir." Alistair froze his wine glass halfway to his lips. It was as if a ghost had just spoken. She continued, her gaze unwavering, her French so fluid and natural, it made his own practiced words sound like a butcher's clumsy work. "La véritable incompétence n'est pas de mal placer un couteau. c'est de confondre la cruauté avec l'autorité. True incompetence is not misplacing a knife. It is confusing cruelty with authority. The air left Alistair's lungs. He could feel the blood drain from his face. Every head in the restaurant was turned towards them, but he couldn't see them. He could only see her, this waitress, who had just dissected his character with the precision of a surgeon in the language of his dead wife. But she wasn't finished. She took a step closer to the table, her posture no longer that of a deferential server, but of an equal. Quant au couteau, vous avez raison. C'était une erreur de ma part. J'ai été distraite par une discussion à la table 3 sur la technique de l'impasto chez Van Gogh, et j'ai agi par automatisme. Je vous prie de m'excuser. As for the knife, you are correct. It was my mistake. I was distracted by a discussion at table 3 about Van Gogh's impasto technique, and I acted on autopilot. I ask you to excuse me. The sheer intellectual weight of her excuse, casually dropping Van Gogh's impasto technique into her apology, was a blow more stunning than any shouted insult could ever be. She wasn't just fluent. She was educated. Deeply so. Alistair was utterly speechless. His carefully constructed world, where he was the smartest, most powerful man in any room, had just been demolished by a waitress. The manager, Mr. Dubois, looked like he was about to faint. Clara then reached down and, with a grace that was almost balletic, picked up the offending knife. She placed it correctly to the right of the plate. She then looked him directly in the eye. Permettez-moi de vous dire, monsieur, que Juliet aurait eu honte de vous ce soir. She said, her voice, now softer, but laced with a profound, cutting sorrow. Allow me to tell you, sir, that Juliet would have been ashamed of you tonight. The name, Juliet. It hit him like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left him gasping for air. How could she possibly know his wife's name? He had never mentioned it. He stared at her, his mind reeling. Who was this woman? His rage, which had been a bonfire, was instantly extinguished, replaced by a cold, bewildering shock. His attack had been predicated on a set of assumptions that she was simple, uneducated, and beneath him. Every single one had been wrong. He had been the fool. He had been the incompetent one. He looked around the room. Everyone was staring their faces, a mixture of shock, pity, and a little bit of schadenfreude. The great Alistair Finch, publicly and eloquently dismantled. He couldn't stay. He couldn't eat. He couldn't breathe. He stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. He dropped several $100 bills onto the table, far more than the cost of the meal. It was a reflexive act, the only way he knew how to respond to a situation he couldn't control by throwing money at it. He looked at Clara one last time. Her face was calm again, her point made. She had not raised her voice. She had not insulted him. She had simply held up a mirror, and he was horrified by what he saw. Without another word, he turned and strode out of the restaurant, leaving behind a perfectly cooked steak, a legendary bottle of wine, a stunned silence, and the complete and utter mystery of the waitress who spoke in perfect French. He needed answers, and he would get them. The walk back to his car was a blur. The rain had picked up, plastering his silver hair to his scalp, but he didn't feel the cold. His mind was a maelstrom of shame, confusion, and a burgeoning, unfamiliar emotion, curiosity. Juliet aurait eu honte de vous ce soir. The words echoed not in Clara's voice, but in Juliet's. He sank into the back of the rolls, and Thomas, his driver, glanced in the rearview mirror, his expression carefully neutral. Home, Mr. Finch. No, Alistair said, his voice hoarse. Stay here. Wait. He couldn't just leave. He couldn't let it end like that. The insult to his pride was one thing he'd dealt with bigger blows in the boardroom. It was her use of Juliet's name that had pierced through his armor. It was too specific, too personal. It wasn't a lucky guess. For 2 hours, Alistair Finch, a man whose time was valued in the tens of thousands of dollars per minute, sat in his car in the rain outside a modest West Village bistro. He watched the staff clean up their movements, visible through the steamy windows. Finally, just after midnight, the lights inside dimmed. Clara emerged, bundled in a simple, well-worn peacoat. She held an umbrella, but the wind whipped it mercilessly. She looked smaller now, without the formal posture of her uniform, more vulnerable. She started walking down the street, her pace brisk. Thomas followed her, at a distance. Thomas did as he was told, the massive car gliding silently behind her. It felt predatory, and a part of Alistair hated himself for it, but the need to understand was overwhelming. She walked for several blocks before descending the steps to a subway station. "Stop here," Alistair commanded. He watched her disappear into the subterranean world of the city's transit system, a world he hadn't set foot in for 30 years. He leaned his head back against the plush leather. Who was she? A struggling actress from Quebec, a French expat fallen on hard times. And how did she know about Juliet? His wife had been a private person. They weren't tabloid fixtures. Their connection to this specific restaurant was known only to a close circle of friends. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to the one person who could get him answers at this hour. His head of security, a former Mossad agent named Gabriel. Need a background check. Name Clara. Waitress at Le Ciel Bleu West Village. Find everything. The reply was instantaneous. On it. The next morning, Alistair was in his home office, a vast minimalist space of glass and steel overlooking the city. He hadn't slept. He had spent the night pacing, replaying the scene in his mind, the sting of her words not fading. A file encrypted and password protected arrived in his inbox at 7 a.m. He opened it, and the world tilted on its axis. Her full name was Clara Dubois, 27 years old, no criminal record, no debt other than a mountain of student loans. And then he saw it. She was not an actress. She was not an expat. Clara Dubois was a PhD candidate at Columbia University. Her field of study art history, with a specialization in 19th century French Impressionism. Her dissertation, currently on hold due to financial reasons, was titled Lumière Fugitive, the Hidden Symbolism and Influence of Claude Monet's Late Water Lilies. Her French was perfect because she spent her summers doing archival research in Paris at the Musée Marmottan Monet. Her undergraduate degree was a double major in French literature and art history from Yale, where she had graduated summa cum laude. The reason she was waitressing was laid bare in the financial section. Her father, a high school history teacher in Ohio, had suffered a debilitating stroke 6 months prior. Her mother had quit her job to be his full-time caregiver. The medical bills were astronomical, and their insurance was a joke. Clara had put her doctorate on hold and taken 2 jobs, the restaurant and cataloguing books, for a rare book dealer to send money home. She was drowning. Alistair leaned back, a feeling of profound, sickening shame washing over him. He had berated a scholar. He had mocked a woman holding her family together with sheer grit and intellect. The weakness he had perceived in her eyes was the exhaustion of a warrior. But the final piece of the puzzle, the most critical one, was in the family details. Her last name. Dubois, the same as the flustered manager at the restaurant. The file confirmed it. Mr. Jean-Luc Dubois was her uncle. And then the connection to Juliet. It was a single line in the supplementary notes, a detail a lesser investigator would have missed. For 2 years, while Juliet was alive, she had been a patron sponsor of a specific fellowship at Columbia's Art History Department, a fellowship for promising graduate students researching French art, a fellowship that had been awarded 3 years ago to Clara Dubois. They had met, not just once, but several times at university functions for donors and recipients. Juliet had taken a special interest in Clara's work. She had been impressed by her passion and her brilliant mind. She had spoken of her often. "Alistair, you must meet this young woman, Clara," he remembered Juliet saying one evening. "She has such fire, such a clear eye for beauty. She sees the world the way Monet must have." He had been busy, closing a deal in Tokyo, launching a new satellite. He'd brushed it off. "That's wonderful, my love," he'd said, his mind a million miles away. He had never made the time. He had never met the brilliant young woman his wife so admired, until last night, when he had tried to destroy her over the placement of a knife. The self-loathing that filled him was absolute. He had not only dishonored his own grief, he had desecrated the memory of his wife's kindness, her patronage, her legacy. The shame was a physical weight, heavier than any loss he had ever taken on the stock market. He had to fix this. Not with money, not by sending a check through a lawyer. He had to face her. He had to apologize. He found her email address in the file. His fingers, which could command global markets, trembled as he typed. "Miss Dubois, I owe you an apology of the profoundest kind. My behavior last night was inexcusable. I find myself in need of your expertise, and would consider it a personal honor if you would grant me 30 minutes of your time to discuss a matter of mutual interest. I will come to wherever is convenient for you. Sincerely, Alistair Finch." He hit send, his heart pounding in his chest. For the first time in decades, Alistair Finch had no idea what would happen next. He had relinquished control. Clara's reply came 3 hours later. It was brief and to the point. "Mr. Finch, apology accepted. There is a coffee shop near Columbia called The Weary Scholar. Tomorrow at 4 p.m. There was no warmth, no anger. Just a simple, factual acceptance. It was more unnerving than if she had cursed him out. The next day, Alistair arrived at the Weary Scholar 15 minutes early. It was the antithesis of his world, a cramped, cozy space filled with the smell of old books and roasted coffee, populated by students hunched over laptops and philosophy texts. He felt like an alien, his tailored suit and $1,000 shoes screaming out of place. He took a small table in the corner and waited, feeling more nervous than he had before the initial public offering of his company. She arrived exactly at 4 p.m. She wasn't wearing her waitress uniform, but a simple pair of jeans, a worn cable-knit sweater, and wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose. She looked every bit the academic. She carried a tote bag overflowing with books. When she saw him, her expression was unreadable. "Mr. Finch," she said, sitting down without offering a handshake. "Ms. Dubois, Clara. Thank you for meeting me." He began, his voice stiff. "I want to reiterate, my actions were born of a grief I was handling poorly. It is not an excuse, but it is the truth. I was not myself." "You were yourself, Mr. Finch," she corrected him quietly, but without malice. "You were just a version of yourself you don't like to show the world. We all have one. Your wife, Juliet, she only showed me her best self. She was luminous." The way she said it with such genuine admiration was another dagger to his conscience. "She spoke of you." Alistair admitted, his voice low. "She said you had a clear eye for beauty. I'm ashamed to say I wasn't paying attention back then." "She was very kind," Clara said, a flicker of warmth in her eyes. "Her fellowship is the only reason I was able to get this far. When she passed, the university named it after her. The Juliet Dubois Finch Fellowship. I was the last student she personally selected. The middle name. He'd forgotten Juliet had insisted on using her maiden name Dubois for her philanthropic work. He looked at Clara. Of course, her uncle, Jean-Luc Dubois, Juliet's cousin. It all clicked into place. This wasn't just a patron-student relationship. They were family. Distant, perhaps, but family nonetheless. And he had brutalized his late wife's cousin's daughter. The scale of his transgression deepened. I didn't make the connection, he murmured, feeling foolish. Most people don't, Clara said with a shrug. My uncle wanted to make his own way in America, without relying on his famous cousin's name. An awkward silence fell between them. Alistair knew he had to get to the point. This couldn't just be an apology. It had to be an act of restitution. Clara, he said, leaning forward, my apology is worthless if it's just words. As I said in my email, I need your expertise. It's about Juliet's art collection. Clara's eyebrows raised slightly. Her collection, I thought it was all donated to the Met after her death. The public collection, yes, Alistair confirmed. But she had a private collection. Pieces she bought for herself. For our homes. Impressionist and post-impressionist works. Since she died, it has all been locked away in a climate-controlled storage unit. I haven't been able to look at it. He paused, the confession costing him. I don't know what to do with it. The auction houses are circling like vultures, but it feels wrong. It feels like selling her soul. She loved those paintings. She knew their stories. I know nothing. They're just assets on an insurance form to me. He finally looked at her, laying his cards on the table. I want to hire you. Not as a waitress, not as an assistant. I want to hire you as a consultant, as a scholar. I want you to catalogue the collection, research the provenance of each piece. Tell me their stories. Tell me what she saw in them. I want you to help me build a private museum, a foundation in her name to house them. Something permanent. Clara stared at him, her expression shifting from cautious neutrality to stunned disbelief. You want me to curate Juliet's private collection. I want you to be the founding director of the Juliet Dubois Finch Foundation for the Arts. He said the idea solidifying in his own mind as he spoke it. I will pay you a salary that will not only cover your family's medical bills, but will allow you to complete your doctorate without financial concern for the rest of your life. You will have unlimited access to the collection and a budget for research and acquisitions. All I ask is that you bring her legacy to life. It was a life raft. No, it was a luxury yacht offered to a woman who was treading water in a stormy sea. He was using his power, his money, but for the first time in a long time, it felt right. It felt like something Juliet would have wanted. Clara was silent for a full minute, her mind clearly racing. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the pride, the desperation, the sheer unbelievable scale of the offer. Why? She finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. After how you treated me. Alistair met her gaze, and for the first time he let the polished armor of the billionaire fall away, exposing the raw grief beneath. Because you're the only person I've met since she died who has shown me what she was truly like, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You're intelligent, you're passionate, you don't suffer fools, and you have a deep appreciation for the beauty she loved. And because you were right, she would have been ashamed of me. I need to become a man she wouldn't be ashamed of. I think you can help me do that. Tears welled in Clara's eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming, life-altering relief. The weight of her world, the constant grinding worry about money, her father, her stalled future, He saw it all lift from her shoulders in that moment. Okay. She breathed a single tear, tracing a path down her cheek. Yes, I'll do it. A few days later, Clara stood in a vast, white, climate-controlled storage facility in Queens. Alistair stood beside her as a worker used a crowbar to open a large wooden crate. Inside, nestled in soft padding, was a canvas. It was a landscape bathed in the soft, hazy light of a French morning. This was her favorite, Alistair said softly. A Pissarro, she said. Clara stepped closer, her eyes scanning the canvas with an intensity that Alistair had never seen before. Her academic mind took over. She looked at the brushwork, the signature, the texture of the canvas. She spent hours with the first few paintings, her focus absolute. Alistair watched, fascinated. She was in her element, a different person, entirely from the waitress or the weary student. Late in the afternoon, she was examining a small, unsigned painting of a water lily pond dated on the back as 1875. It was listed in the insurance manifest as School of Monet. It was beautiful but considered minor. Clara stared at it, her brow furrowed. She took out a small magnifying glass from her bag and leaned in close, examining the way the artist had captured the reflection of the sky and the water. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice hushed with a strange excitement. "There's something wrong with this painting." "Wrong? Is it a fake?" he asked, a pang of disappointment hitting him. "No," she said, turning to him, her eyes wide, with a dawning, impossible idea. "I don't think it's a fake at all. I think it's the opposite. The brushwork here, the use of violet in the shadows, it's not School of Monet. It's too bold, too confident for a student. It feels foundational." She looked back at the painting, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I think Juliet didn't just buy a minor painting. I think she may have found a lost study for the Impression Soleil Levant. I think she might have bought a Monet without anyone realizing it." The implications were staggering. If she was right, this small canvas was not just a piece of art. It was a piece of history. And it was the first clue in a mystery that would prove to be far deeper and more dangerous than either of them could ever imagine. The painting became Clara's obsession. While she diligently catalogued the rest of Juliet's collection, a stunning assembly of works by Berthe Morisot, Alfred Sisley, and Gustave Caillebotte, her thoughts constantly returned to the small, unsigned water lily study. It was an intellectual itch she had to scratch. Alistair, true to his word, gave her every resource she needed. He converted a disused library in his penthouse into a state-of-the-art conservation and research lab. He funded trips to Paris for her to consult with experts at the Musée d'Orsay and to scour the archives of the Durand-Ruel Gallery Monet's primary dealer. The art world, however, is a closed and skeptical society. When Clara, a then unknown PhD candidate, began making inquiries about a potential lost Monet, she was met with polite dismissal. The official catalogue raisonné, the definitive record of an artist's work, was considered gospel. If it wasn't in the Wildenstein Institute's index, it didn't exist. "They think I'm a romantic fool," she told Alistair one evening, frustration etched on her face. They had fallen into a comfortable routine meeting at the end of each day to discuss her progress. Their relationship had evolved into one of mutual respect. He was fascinated by her mind, and she was beginning to see past the ruthless billionaire to the grieving man who was trying to reconnect with his wife's soul. "Experts are experts in what is known," Alistair said, pouring her a glass of water. "Discovery is the realm of romantics. What does your gut tell you?" "My gut and the microscopic analysis of the pigment tells me this is real," she said, her passion flaring. The cobalt blue, the viridian green. The chemical composition is identical to the pigments Monet was using in the mid-1870s. But the most compelling evidence isn't on the canvas. I think it's behind it. She led him over to the painting, which was now on a professional easel under specialized lighting. She pointed to the back of the wooden stretcher frame. Faint, almost illegible pencil markings were hidden under a century of dust and grime. "It's a dealer's mark," she explained, "from a small gallery in Argenteuil that went out of business in 1880. But there's something else here." She used a pair of tweezers to gently pry at the corner of the canvas where it was tacked to the frame. Tucked between the canvas and the wood was a tiny folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. It was a fragment of a letter. The script was elegant, feminine, and in French. "The light is a lie, but a beautiful one. He captures it, but he does not own it. Be careful, my friend. Men who chase the sun often get burned." The fragment was unsigned. It was cryptic, poetic, and raised more questions than answers. "This changes things," Alistair said, his voice grim. "This is no longer just about authentication. This is about provenance. Who owned this painting before Juliet? His security chief, Gabriel, was tasked with a new mission trace, the ownership of the painting, a process known as establishing provenance. It was like genealogical research for art, and it was notoriously difficult. Gabriel's team worked backward from Juliet's acquisition. She had purchased the painting 6 months before her death from a private art dealer named Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a smooth, well-respected figure in the art world, known for his discretion and his uncanny ability to find lost masterpieces. He ran a boutique gallery on Madison Avenue and was Alistair's professional and social rival. Their dislike was mutual and venomous. Juliet, however, had trusted Thorne. She believed he had a genuine love for art, unlike the other dealers she called mercenaries. She bought the School of Monet painting from him for a modest sum, around 200 $200,000. If it were a real Monet, its value would be in the tens of millions. Why would Thorne sell a potential Monet for so little? Alistair mused, pacing his office. It doesn't make sense. He's greedy, but he's not stupid. Maybe he didn't know what he had, Clara suggested. Unlikely, Alistair countered. Thorne's entire reputation is built on knowing what others miss. There's something else going on here. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While digitizing Juliet's personal files, Clara found a password-protected folder on an old laptop labeled My Folly. Alistair's tech team managed to decrypt it. Inside was a single document, Juliet's private journal. Alistair felt a pang of guilt, as if he were violating her privacy. But Clara gently convinced him. She was investigating something, Alistair. Maybe she left this for you to find. The entries from the last year of her life were filled with her usual observations on life friends and books. But in the final months, a new anxious tone emerged. She wrote about the painting. October 5th, Marcus brought me the little water lily today. He called it a charming study. But it's more than that. The light, it breathes. It feels like Claude's own hand. Marcus laughed when I said so. He was too quick to laugh. November 12th, I sent a photograph to Professor Renaud in Paris, my old mentor. He's intrigued but skeptical. He warns that for every true discovery there are 1,000 clever forgeries. Marcus is a charmer. But is he a liar, December 20th? Something is wrong. I had the frame examined by a restorer. He found the letter fragment. He also found evidence the canvas had been recently removed from its original stretcher and placed on this one. Why would anyone do that unless they were trying to hide something? The final entry was dated October 10th, the day before she died. Her words were chilling. January 15th. I know. I finally know. It's not a forgery. It's real. And Marcus Thorne knows it's real. The original stretcher, which I tracked down to a dusty antique shop in Rouen, had Monet's signature on the back. Thorne removed it. He swapped the frames. But why? Why sell it to me at all? It's part of a bigger plan. He's planning something. I am meeting with my lawyer tomorrow to... The entry ended there. The next day, Juliet was dead. A tragic car accident on a winding road in upstate New York. A brake failure, the police report said. An accident. Alistair read the last entry, and a cold, terrifying certainty settled in his bones. It wasn't an accident, he whispered, his face ashen. Clara looked at him, her eyes wide with horror. Alistair, what are you saying? Marcus Thorne. Alistair said, his voice like ice. He sold her a masterpiece disguised as a trifle. But she was too smart. She figured it out. She was going to expose him. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Thorne's plan was likely diabolical. Sell the painting to the Finch collection, wait a few years, and then discover evidence that it was a real Monet. The value would skyrocket, his reputation as a genius dealer would be cemented, and he would likely have an arrangement to get a massive commission on its future sale. But Juliet's investigation threatened to expose his fraud, the deliberate concealment of the signature, before his plan could come to fruition. So he had stopped her. Alistair Finch stood up and walked to the window, staring down at the city lights. The grief he felt was now mingled with a white-hot, diamond-hard rage. He had spent 2 years mourning a tragedy. He now had to avenge a murder. Clara, he said, turning from the window, his eyes blazing with a cold fire she had never seen before. Our work is not just about art anymore. I'm going to need your mind. We are going to destroy Marcus Thorne. Alistair's first instinct was to call the police to unleash his army of lawyers. But Clara stopped him. We can't, she said, her voice firm, her mind already working through the strategic angles. Think like a curator, Alistair. Our evidence is circumstantial. Juliet's journal is inadmissible as hearsay. The original stretcher frame is a key piece, but Thorne could claim he bought it that way. It's his word against the journal of a dead woman. He'll walk and we'll have shown our hand. So what do we do? Let him get away with it. Alistair's voice was raw. No, Clara said, a glint in her eye. We don't go to the police. We create a situation where the truth becomes his only option. We set a trap, a beautiful, elegant trap. Her plan was audacious. It combined her deep knowledge of the art world with Alistair's immense resources. The first step was to publicly announce the formation of the Juliet Dubois Finch Foundation. Alistair held a press conference with Clara by his side as the newly appointed director. The announcement sent ripples through the art world. The second step was the trap itself. The foundation's inaugural event would be a private gala and exhibition titled Hidden Light, the Private Collection of Juliet Finch. The centerpiece of the exhibition, leaked to select art journals, would be a newly re-examined work from the school of Monet. The bait was cast. Marcus Thorne would have to attend. To decline would be an admission of guilt, a sign that he was afraid of what the Finch Foundation had found. His ego wouldn't allow it. As predicted, Thorne's RSVP was one of the first to arrive. The night of the gala, Alistair's penthouse was transformed. The walls were hung with Juliet's collection, each piece perfectly lit. The city's elite collectors, critics, museum directors, mingled sipping champagne. Alistair played the gracious host, but his eyes constantly scanned the crowd waiting. Clara, in a simple but elegant black dress, moved through the room with a newfound confidence, discussing the art with an authority that captivated everyone she spoke to. And then Marcus Thorne arrived. He was exactly as Alistair remembered, impeccably dressed, oozing a reptilian charm. He greeted Alistair with a false smile. "Alistair, my dear fellow, a wonderful tribute to a wonderful woman." Juliet had such an exquisite eye. "She certainly did, Marcus," Alistair replied, his voice dangerously smooth. "She saw things other people missed." The main event was a short presentation in the Grand Library. Guests gathered as Alistair took a small stage. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Tonight is about celebrating my wife's passion. And in her spirit of discovery, our director, Ms. Clara Dubois, has made a significant finding." He gestured to Clara, who stepped forward. All eyes went to the single painting displayed on an easel beside her, veiled with a velvet cloth. Juliet Finch believed that every painting has a secret story. Clara began, her voice clear and steady. And this piece, purchased as a minor work, held a particularly deep one. She unveiled the painting. It was the water lily study. A collective gasp went through the room. Through extensive research, Clara continued, including pigment analysis and archival investigation, we have authenticated this as an early study by Claude Monet, circa 1875. A wave of excited murmurs erupted. Marcus Thorne stood in the crowd, a tight forced smile on his face. He began to applaud, as if he were celebrating their good fortune. "But that is not its only secret," Clara said, raising her voice slightly. Her eyes found Thorne in the crowd. "We also discovered that the painting's original signed stretcher was deliberately removed and replaced in an effort to conceal its identity. A blatant act of art fraud." The room fell silent. Thorne's smile faltered. "And we believe," Clara said, her voice dropping, "that when my patron Juliet Finch discovered this fraud, the person responsible took measures to silence her permanently." She paused, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. Thorne's face had gone pale. He knew he was trapped. Alistair stepped forward again. "The original stretcher frame is now in a secure vault. The New York District Attorney's Office has opened a new investigation into Juliet's death based on this and other evidence we have provided. They are particularly interested in speaking with the last person who sold her a piece of art." He looked directly at Marcus Thorne. Every head in the room turned. It was a masterstroke. They hadn't accused him directly of murder in front of everyone. They had accused him with evidence of art fraud, a career-ending crime in this world. The murder allegation was a subtle public threat, a poison-tipped dagger slipped between his ribs. Thorne was trapped between two impossibilities. If he stayed silent, his reputation was shattered. If he fought the fraud charge, he would be at the center of a murder investigation with Alistair Finch's infinite resources aimed directly at him. His empire, built on lies and charm, crumbled in a single silent moment. He turned without a word and pushed his way through the stunned crowd fleeing the penthouse. His career was over. His freedom was a ticking clock. Later that night, after the last guest had departed, Alistair and Clara stood alone in the quiet gallery in front of the little Monet. "Juliet would have been proud of you tonight, Clara," Alistair said, his voice filled with a quiet, profound respect. "You didn't just use your knowledge. You used your wisdom." "She's the one who found it," Clara replied, looking at the painting. "She solved the mystery. We just read her notes." They stood in a comfortable silence, two people from different worlds brought together by a tragedy. The journey that had begun with a cruel outburst over a misplaced knife had ended here with justice, honor, and the quiet celebration of a legacy reborn. The grief for Juliet was still there, a permanent part of Alistair's landscape. but it was no longer a destructive storm. It was a soft, guiding light reflected in the brushstrokes of a painting and in the eyes of the brilliant young woman who had taught him how to see it. Their partnership was just beginning, built on a shared mission to find the hidden beauty and truth that Juliet had cherished. In the end, this story isn't just about a billionaire and a waitress. It's about the incredible lives hidden just beneath the surface. It's a powerful reminder that the person serving your coffee could be a scholar. The quiet janitor could be a poet, and the silent stranger next to you could be fighting a battle you know nothing about. Alistair Finch's wealth couldn't buy him peace, but an act of listening, of seeing someone for who they truly are, gave him a path to redemption. It shows us that a moment of cruelty can be undone by a lifetime of purpose, and that sometimes the most valuable things we can discover are the hidden masterpieces within each other. If this story of unexpected connection and hidden truths moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share it with someone who might need this reminder. And for more real-life stories that explore the depths of the human heart, make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Thank you for listening.